Welcome to Truckee Talks. I'm your host, Maya Schneider, and I'm pleased to introduce you to this week's guest, Lori Paris. Lori, welcome to the show.
Thanks, I'm happy to be here.
It's nice to have you here. Now, you're here as a local author. You've got a recently published book. It's called Follow Your Heart. We'll hold this up and let the camera take a look at this. And we're going to be talking about this book. It's fiction, but it's not too far from fiction. You were adopted, and this book actually follows the life of a fictional character who was adopted.
That's right.
How did you learn that you were an adopted child? How old were you?
Ever since I can remember, I always knew I was adopted. My parents always told me. And I think the reason that it was so important to them is because my mother was adopted, but she never knew until she was an adult. And because it was a difficult experience for her finding out unexpectedly that when I was adopted, she wanted to be sure that I always knew.
Now, in the story, the character Sarah finds out as a young adult. Did you gather some of her experience from your mother's experience?
I did, because it was tough on my mom to have to find out that way. And she had a lot of issues because of it. So I wanted to incorporate that into the story a little bit, even though that wasn't my experience, it was my mom's experience.
A second generation adoptee, is that typical? I don't hear so much about them.
I don't know. It actually is. In my parents' case, they had a natural child, have an older brother, and then after he was born, they couldn't have any more children, and then that's why they adopted me.
So here you are.
So here I am.
So when did you decide to find your biological parents?
I decided when I had my first child. I was always curious, always felt a little bit different growing up. I didn't really look like anybody else in my family. We all had different personalities. But it really wasn't until I had a child of my own that I really started to think about it. And I also was curious about my medical background as well because of having children. So that's pretty much what made the decision for me to go ahead and search.
And how did you launch that? How did you begin your search?
Well, when I started searching, it was about 16 years ago, and so we didn't have as many options as we do today. I hired a private investigator to search for me. And that was the easiest and the quickest way to go. And it took him a couple of months. He found my birth mother for me first. And as a matter of fact, he became so involved that he went with me when we had our reunion, which I think is a very good idea because you're so nervous about meeting somebody for the first time. It's kind of nice if you have someone else along for support.
A balance, an intermediary.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. It really helped. But because we'd also gotten to know each other so well too, he wanted to be a part of what was going on.
He wanted to support you in that.
It was really sweet to have him there. It was really nice.
Well, that is nice.
Yeah, it was.
And what was that like, meeting your biological mother?
Oh gosh, it was really like a fairy tale. She had always hoped that I would find her. It was like a made-for-TV movie. We met in a restaurant, fell into each other's arms, crying. The private investigator was crying.
I'm trying not to cry.
No, it was really wonderful, moving moment for us. She also had had other children, and all of the children knew about me. I was never kept a secret. So then eventually I also got to meet them as well too, and just kind of became a member of the family.
Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, I think because I've always been interested in writing. I've written off and on for years and years. I really wanted to try my hand at a novel. And I thought that it would really make a good premise. It was a very moving story to find my birth parents, and so I wanted to incorporate some of that into the book, but I also wanted to fictionalize the characters because then I could kind of make things turn out the way that I wanted them to. So plus it was a little bit easier too to try and protect the privacy of my family as well too.
Did you meet your biological father as well?
I did, yes. That was interesting. My biological father never knew about me. And so when we contacted him, it was quite a shock to him, obviously. And he was a little bit suspicious at first of what my intentions were, what my motivation was, until we actually set up a meeting. The private investigator went with me again. And then once we met, everything was fine. I look just like him.
I was going to say, did your parents recognize you, your
Oh,
biological
absolutely.
parents?
I look just like my father, so there was absolutely no question once we were together that he knew I was his daughter. And then really what made it even more heartwarming is that he'd never had any children, and I was his only child.
Oh.
So at the age of 30, he discovers, I was 30 years old, but he discovers here he has a grown daughter and he has 2 grandchildren as well too. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty exciting.
How do your parents that raised you feel about your relationship with your biological parents?
My father had passed away by the time I searched for my parents. My mother initially was for it, and then felt differently about it afterwards. It caused some conflict for us. It was hard, but we worked it out. It's kind of a challenging situation to incorporate all these other family members and get together, and so we worked on it, and it worked out in the end.
Yeah, that your adoptive parents put so much love
They do.
into you.
They really do. And I think that it is a reason that some people are reluctant about searching because they're afraid that they'll hurt their adoptive parents. And it definitely is something to consider and to be aware of. But the way that I felt about it is that I have enough love for 2 sets of parents, and they're such different relationships. I would never ever feel any different about my adoptive parents. Those are my parents. So, and let me also say that my birth parents, I don't think of as my mom and dad.
Right.
I had a mom and dad, the people who raised me, and those were my adoptive parents, and that's who I will always think of them that way. So there was never that kind of conflict there involved. My birth parents, they're very close relatives to me, but that's really more how I think of them.
I was going to ask you if there was a way to describe the relationship with biological parents.
It's really unique, especially because you don't have any history with them, but yet you have this connection with them. You look like them, you talk like them, you act like them. Something that you've never had, you've never experienced in your life, creates this bond between you that it's hard to describe. It's a relationship that you've really never had before, and you have to get to know one another. It takes a long time. You develop a relationship over time. But it's very, very unique situation and how you feel about them.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
it really is. In the book, Sarah's search for her biological parents ends pretty happily. And in your life, it's turned out pretty well.
Right.
But it isn't always that way.
No, it's not.
How would you or do you advise other adopted children, adult children, whether or not to search for their biological parents?
You have to be willing to accept the risk. It's a huge risk to search because you never know what you're going to find. First of all, you don't know if you're even going to be able to find them. That could be a serious disappointment. If you do find them, you don't know what it's going to be like.
Right.
When you decide to search, you are changing the course of people's lives without their permission. And that in itself is a risk. You don't know if they're going to accept you. You don't know if it's going to be so difficult for them that they won't want to see you. You have to be really prepared to understand what your motivations are. If you are looking to try and replace something in your life, it's not a good idea. But if you're honest with yourself and you want medical history, or you want to know more about your background, or you simply want to know where you came from, you just have to be willing to take whatever you find and then go from there. So sometimes things turn out really well, sometimes they don't. I happen to be a member of a support group for adoptees, and I've heard some really sad stories, some really difficult things that people have had to deal with. So you just have to be willing to take the risk.
Take what comes your way.
Take what comes your way.
Tell us again how old you were when you went on the search for your biological mother.
I was 30.
So
I was 30 years old.
You were mature.
Exactly.
And you had established a life of your own.
Exactly.
And I think that must have made a difference.
It does make a difference. I was happily married. I had children. I came from a loving family. I had this support group that if I should be rejected or disappointed in any way, that I had my family. So I wasn't counting on everything on that search. One of the differences in my character in the story is that Sarah loses everyone in her life that she loves, and she's all alone. And so that's really her motivation for searching, which is really, very, very unlike my situation, where I had a lot of love and support. So whatever was going to happen, I knew that I was going to be okay.
I liked that Sarah, in the midst of her grief, found a puppy to pull into her life. It's sort of the familiar and some way to process her emotions without necessarily latching on to another person. And she really evidences her independence in this book.
Right, and also her need to make a connection.
And her need to make a connection at the same time.
Exactly.
It's a nice balance. Well, let's get back to the book for a few minutes. What was the writing process like for you? You say you enjoy writing. What was writing this book like for you?
It was a great experience. There are some very difficult scenes in the book, very difficult for me to write, just because they're so emotional. I had to recreate some scenes that had to do with my birth mother giving me up, my birth parents seeing each other again for the first time in 25, 30 years. So the emotional aspect of it was, at times it was difficult, but it was also this really cathartic process of putting that down on paper. What I really enjoyed the most, I think, though, was the characters and writing about the characters, creating those characters. When you're writing a novel, you get so close to them. You really do. They're like your friends.
You want to know what's coming next.
Right. So that's what I enjoyed the most about it, really, was creating the characters, but then also trying to convey in the story the complexity, the intensity of searching for your biological parents, what that can be like afterwards as well, too.
The aftermath. I found myself being drawn to the private investigator and his relationship with Sarah and just who he was. He was
he's a real
he brought
character.
some fun into the book. What did you like least about writing this book?
What's difficult for me is plotting. What I do is I sit down, I start with a premise, I sit down, and then I start creating the characters, but I don't always know where the story is going to go until I actually get there. So plotting is difficult because you want to be able to keep your reader interested, you want to create tension, you want to create conflict, and then also to having to pay attention to details. Something that your character said, or where they went to school, or those kind of things. That consistency through, and you have to go back, and you have to double check, and you have to do all of those kind of things.
That's what editors are for.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, let's talk about that, because publishing a book is a far cry from writing a book.
It is.
What were the steps that you took, and here you are published, and what a wonderful thing
Well,
that is.
first of all, let me say that trying to get published it's very much like trying to break into show business. It's very difficult to do.
I wouldn't know anything about either.
It took me a long time, a couple of years, before I had my manuscript accepted. But what I was told, and what I always say to other people as well, is that you just have to keep trying.
Yeah.
You have to persevere. You worked so long and so hard. You put your heart and soul into something. You can't give up, even after 30 rejections, 40 rejections. And believe me, I had that many.
Yeah.
But I just kept at it, and I just kind of kept plugging along. And fortunately, the publisher who published my book is a publishing house that tends to really support first-time authors. And so that made the process easier for me. Once they accepted my manuscript, they were very, very easy to work with. But I did a lot of the editing myself as well, too.
Well, we should probably get this up on the screen so that our viewers can see this as well. Again, its author is Lori Paris. The title of the book is Follow Your Heart, and it's available, now I'm going to get this wrong here, from America House.
Right, and the publishing house is Publish America, and America House is their imprint.
And you can find them at www.publishamerica.com.
That's right.
And then we'll also have another site up available at the end of this show where people can get a hold of you.
Right,
and
that's
find
right.
you and ask you questions. Do you find yourself being drawn to other authors in the Tahoe Truckee area? Are there other people that you get together with and collaborate or share ideas, or do you lock yourself in a room
I
for
lock
6
myself
months?
in a room, and that's exactly what I do. I know that that process is different for each author. I prefer to work, independently, and I just find that that's the easiest thing for me to do. But what another benefit of this publishing house is that we have a website, of course, we have a message board, and all of the authors talk to one another. And we're from all over the country.
Okay.
And we all help each other, support each other, we give each other advice, what works, what doesn't. As a matter of fact, today I found out that our youngest author just got published. He is 12 years old.
12?
12 years old.
Oh, that's great.
I was absolutely amazed. I'm so impressed. I mean, I just think that's absolutely terrific. I mean, he wrote a children's book, and he's being published. And
I think I'm
so,
glad it wasn't a murder mystery.
I know. Wait.
You're right.
But it's such a supportive group that I rely a lot on that, and my help from them. And of course, I've read a lot of their books, and we review for each other, and we do all sorts of things like that too. It's really helpful.
How old are your children now, Lori?
Oh my goodness, my kids are 17. My daughter's 17. My son is 15.
And what do they think about mom being an author?
I think it's pretty cool.
And what do they think about mom being adopted?
Well, it's so funny because my kids have been through this with me from the very beginning. My daughter was an infant when I found my birth mother. So they're quite used to it. I think it was confusing for them for a while because they had so many grandparents and so many relatives and who are all these people? But they don't care. I mean, they love everyone and they're happy. And it took us quite a while before they really understood exactly who everyone was, and that was fun.
And put them in some order and something that made sense to them.
Right, exactly. But you know how kids are. I mean, they just accept everyone, and they just, and everyone's been so good to them, and we're just all kind of one big happy family, so.
Well, I imagine during that process, while they were trying to sort it all out, you were also trying to sort it all out and sort of establish where these people would fit into your life. And
that's where a lot of the challenges take place. It really takes a lot of time. You don't have any reference for it. I mean, there's no manual for this. And so you just kind of have to fly by the seat of your pants. It takes time. It takes a long time to get to know someone. And for me to meet my other siblings and other members of the family. There are some members of the family who found it really difficult to accept me. I don't want to paint this as a complete fairy tale picture.
Right. Okay.
There are some difficulties there But we deal with that. You know, we've worked it out, and I understand that, and so for those family members that it is difficult for, then I just try not to make it an issue for them.
And I think whatever a normal family is, I don't know anybody that has one.
I know, I don't either.
We all have something.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, the way that I look at it is that I have an adoptive family, I have a birth family, I also have a step family. They're all my family.
Right.
So it really doesn't matter.
Right. What are the titles? It's the relationships that are important.
That's right. Exactly.
Do you have favorite authors, Lori? Are there people who you love to read?
So many.
Yeah.
Oh, so many. I read so much, which is another piece of advice that authors will often give to other people who are interested. If you have to read and read and read, just read like crazy. I love Stephen King. I love Sue Grafton, Dick Francis, James Patterson. Gosh, just so many. I mean, I read a real variety of books, but I love to read books that are entertaining and fast-paced and have lots of dialogue, and so I tend to write that way as well too, because
let's move right through the
let's
story.
just move right along. You want to keep someone's interest, and I find that using a lot of dialogue is the best way to do that. Yeah,
because people always want to eavesdrop in on the conversation.
Right.
They want to know,
Right.
what are they saying? What are they talking about? So
we can get so many
great way to
things
do it.
across that way too,
Right.
in a much shorter period of time than to give a lot of background and give a lot of description.
Right.
I tend to be bored by that a little
Bored
bit
to
myself,
tears.
so I try and stay away from that, you know, overdoing it when I write.
I described one book that I read once as having 12 pages describing a waterfall, and by the time I got to the bottom of that waterfall, I could have cared less about the rest of the book.
Right,
Because
exactly.
It must have been beautiful, but can we move on, please?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Lori, we just got a couple of minutes left. What's next in your life?
I'm working on a second book. I'm probably about third of the way, almost half of the way through it. I've been so busy trying to promote this book that my time is a little bit limited, but that's my next goal, is to get another book published, to complete that, and then I have an idea for a third book on top of that too.
Will that be fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
Fiction,
Yeah. I've really enjoyed it, even though I have written some nonfiction. You can just be so much more creative in writing fiction that I think I want to stick with that for a while. Yeah.
I was going to say something smart, like unless you're Stephen Ambrose, but I guess since that just slipped out, I'll let it go. Well, again, Follow Your Heart by Lori Paris. Lori, is the book available locally?
It will be available at the bookshelf in Truckee.
Great.
And then I also have a major book signing at Barnes & Noble in Reno in November on the 16th. We're celebrating National Adoption Month. And so I'll be having the signing there as well too.
All right. Well, Lori, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you, Maya.
And congratulations. It's a great read.
Thanks so much.
All right. Well, we'll be back in just a minute with upcoming community events, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the show, and here's the upcoming events in and around our region for the week of October 16th. The Autumn Food and Wine Jubilee is returning to the resort at Squaw Creek. This event, sponsored by the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association, promises great food and wine tasting, plus cooking demonstrations and seminars. The Jubilee will be held October 18th through the 20th. Call 1-800-824-6348. And Donner Ski Ranch refuses to let go of the two-wheeled event season just yet. They're bringing the annual Ski Run Scramble to the ranch on October 19th. Call Donner Ski Ranch at 426-3635 for more information. And tell Norm I said hi. On October 19th through the 31st, the Village at Squaw is bringing you the 13 days of Halloween. Ghost stories around the fire pit, costumes, safe street trick-or-treating, and more. Call 584-1000 for details. And mark your calendars now for the upcoming Tahoe Community Nursery School Ski Swap. This is their 39th annual, and it will be held Saturday, October 19th from 10 until 4 at the Alpine Meadows Ski Resort. Call 581-5825 for more information. And all you friends of the Truckee River, pay attention. The 6th annual Truckee River Day returns on October 20th. This is a terrific event. We're calling for volunteers of all ages to help repair and restore the Truckee River and its tributaries and habitats. You need to pre-register, so please call 587-4509 to volunteer. And the Rec and Park Haunted House returns to Truckee on October 24th and 25th. This is fun for kids of all ages and only $3 per person. The Haunted House is open from 6:30 to 8:30 both nights, and the Truckee High School Leadership class is sponsoring a kids' carnival the same night for those kids who don't want to be spooked. The cost for that will be nominal fees for games. Both events will be held at the Truckee Community Center. That's it for this week. Thanks again to Lori Paris for being our guest on Truckee Talks. Ted will be back to bug you next week. Thanks so much for joining us.